You probably showered this morning, maybe last night. You didn't think about it, you just did it, because that's what people do. But if you had been born 800 years ago, in a village somewhere in medieval Europe, the story of your body and its relationship with water would have been completely, shockingly different from what you assume. Here's what nobody tells you about the Middle Ages. The popular image, filthy peasants, unwashed kings, people who never bathed and never cared, is one of history's most stubborn myths. And the truth hiding beneath it is far stranger, far more human, and far more revealing than the myth ever was. Your medieval ancestor thought about cleanliness constantly, not in the same way you do, not with the same tools. But the desire, the deep basic human need to feel clean, to feel presentable, to feel worthy, was there. It always has been. So how did they actually do it? The first thing to understand is that medieval people did not see bathing the way modern popular culture assumes. For most of the 20th century, scholars painted the Middle Ages as a 1,000-year gap in human hygiene, a dark valley between the Roman baths and the Victorian bathroom. Historian Virginia Smith, in her landmark study of the history of cleanliness, spent decades tracing how this assumption became accepted fact without much actual evidence to support it. What she found instead was a culture with its own sophisticated internal logic about the body, water, and what it meant to be clean. That logic started with the face and hands. Every single day, without exception, a medieval person washed their face and their hands. This was not optional. It was moral. It was religious. It was social. Before meals, after meals, before prayer, after handling anything considered unclean, the hands were washed. Not because of germ theory, which wouldn't arrive for another 500 years, but because of something older and just as powerful, the idea that visible dirt was a mark of spiritual disorder and moral failure. Cleanliness, in the medieval mind, was next to godliness, not as a figure of speech, but as a literal belief about the relationship between the body's outer state and the soul's inner one. Your medieval counterpart wasn't washing to kill bacteria. They were washing to signal virtue. And that single distinction changes everything you think you know. The wash basin sat at the entrance to the great hall, in the corner of the kitchen, beside the bed in a nobleman's chamber. Water was poured by a servant, or fetched from a well. Soap existed. It had existed since ancient Babylon. By the medieval period, soap making was a recognized, regulated trade in most European cities, and specific regional varieties. Hard white Castile soap from Spain, black soap from France, soft green soap from England, were bought and sold at markets across the continent. Medieval people used soap. They used it every day for hands and face. They just used it selectively for the full body, because producing enough hot water for a complete immersion bath required time, firewood, and labor that not everyone could afford every morning. What about the rest of the body? Here is where the myth begins to crack entirely. Public bathhouses, called stews in England, bagnos in Italy, stuben in German-speaking lands, étuves in France, existed in virtually every town of any meaningful size across medieval Europe. In 13th century Paris, there were at least 30 public bathhouses operating within the city walls. The bathmaster, or baigneur, was a licensed profession, regulated by guilds the same way a blacksmith or a baker was. Medieval medical texts, translated and analyzed in detail by historian Catherine Park in her studies of body and medicine in late medieval Europe, show that bathing was frequently prescribed by physicians, not avoided. Warm water was believed to open the pores and release trapped illness outward from the body. Cold water was thought to close them and strengthen the skin against disease. Bathing was medicine. Bathing was ritual. Bathing was, for most medieval Europeans living near a town, a completely normal part of life. You went to the bathhouse before a feast day, before a wedding, before making confession, before a long journey. You went not as a special event, but as a regular feature of town life, the way you might now go to a barber or a cafe. The bathhouse experience itself was nothing like what you're picturing. You didn't slide into a pristine white tub alone in a tiled room. You entered a steamy, low-ceilinged communal space, often sharing a large wooden tub with one or two other bathers. Attendants scrubbed your back with rough linen and soft soap. There was food served on boards across the tub. There was wine. There was music in some establishments. There was conversation, gossip, laughter, and negotiation between neighbors. The bathhouse was loud, warm, intimate, and deeply ordinary, and its presence in nearly every medieval town is not a footnote in history. It is a correction to the entire story you were told. So why do we believe medieval people were dirty? Part of the answer is the Black Death. When the plague arrived in Europe in 1347, it killed somewhere between a third and half the continent's population in fewer than 5 years. Medieval doctors, working within the framework of Galenic medicine, the dominant medical system for over 1,000 years, concluded that open pores were allowing the pestilence to enter the body through the skin itself. Warm bath water opened the pores. Therefore warm bathwater was dangerous. The logic was internally consistent. It followed the best science of the day. And so bathing began to fall out of favor, not out of laziness, not out of ignorance, but out of sincere, terrified logic in the face of a catastrophe that killed everyone around you. Historian Philippe Aries, who dedicated much of his career to studying medieval European attitudes toward the body, death, and social order, documented how deeply and durably the plague reshaped human behavior in ways that persisted for generations after the dying stopped. Bathhouses began to close. Communal water began to be feared. The steamy social bathhouse culture that had thrived for 2 centuries contracted almost overnight in many parts of Europe, and the reputation of an entire era for dirtiness was sealed, not because of how people actually lived before the plague, but because of how survivors responded to the most terrifying event in European history. What replaced full immersion bathing was a dry cleaning method called frictioning, rubbing the body vigorously with clean linen cloth until the surface skin cells, oil, and sweat were absorbed into the fabric. It sounds inadequate by modern standards, but linen, as medieval physicians correctly observed, does draw moisture and oils from the skin surface into the weave. This is not myth. This is physics. And it is precisely why linen was chosen for undergarments across the medieval world. The shirt was doing the work of cleaning the skin, and the shirt was then washed. Among those who could afford it, linen undergarments were changed frequently, sometimes daily, precisely because the linen was understood to be drawing the body's impurities out and into itself. Your white linen shirt turning gray after a week of wear was not evidence that you had failed to bathe. It was proof that the shirt had done its job. In a world without running water, without indoor plumbing, without the ability to heat enough water for a full immersion bath every morning, this was not a failure of civilization. It was practical, intelligent engineering adapted to real constraints. What about hair? Medieval hair was washed regularly, though not daily. Herbs were used as rinses. Rosemary, lavender, thyme, sage, and nettles were boiled into water and combed through the hair to clean it and leave a scent. Combs are among the most common personal items recovered from medieval archaeological digs across Europe. They appear in peasant homes and royal chambers alike, carved from bone, antler, wood, and ivory. Their presence in the archaeological record tells you that people were using them constantly, not as decoration, but as a daily tool for managing the hair, scalp, and any uninvited passengers that tried to make a home there. Lice were a genuine problem. A real, constant, uncomfortable, humiliating problem. The frequency with which medieval texts discuss knit combs, herbal treatments, oil-based suffocants applied to the scalp, and home remedies for parasites tells you something important. People noticed. They cared deeply. They were not resigned to it. They fought back using every tool available to them. The presence of lice in the medieval world tells you about the limits of medieval technology, not about a failure of medieval desire for cleanliness. Now consider your teeth. Medieval people cleaned their teeth. The most common method involved a small rough cloth and a chewing stick, a thin twig of hazel, willow, or licorice root, rubbed firmly across the surface of the teeth and along the gum line. Salt was used as an abrasive agent. Ground ash was used. A mixture of ground sage, salt, and dried herbs appears repeatedly across medieval medical and domestic texts as a cleaning paste applied to the teeth. Chewing fennel seeds, parsley, or mint after meals was standard practice for freshening the breath, a habit that survives in restaurant after-dinner mints to this day, though most people who eat them have no idea where the custom comes from. Medieval dental health was not perfect. Abscesses, infections, and extractions were common, but the archaeology is revealing in a way the popular myth is not. Medieval skulls show markedly less tooth decay than modern ones. The reason is simple. The medieval diet contained almost no refined sugar. Honey was the primary sweetener, used sparingly. Rotting teeth in the medieval world came most often from impacted wisdom teeth and untreated infections, not from the kind of sugar-driven cavity that quietly destroys a modern molar. The greatest dental fear of the medieval person was not a cleaning appointment. It was the traveling tooth puller who arrived at the market square once a season and extracted ruined teeth with iron forceps while a crowd of wincing onlookers watched. There is a deeper truth underneath all of this. Across every era of human history, across every culture anthropologists and archaeologists have studied, human beings have wanted to be clean. The methods change. The understanding changes. The frequency changes. But the desire does not. The anthropologist Mary Douglas, in her landmark work Purity and Danger, argued that what any culture defines as dirty tells you exactly what that culture values, fears, and believes about the world. Medieval Europe did not define dirt the way you do. Their version of cleanliness was inseparable from spiritual order, social identity, and medical survival in a world that killed you swiftly and without warning. They were not primitive. They were rational people doing the best they could with what they had, in a world that was harder, colder, more uncertain, and more dangerous than almost anything you have encountered in your life. And when the rules of their world changed, when the plague arrived and the bathhouse became a death trap instead of a refuge, they changed too. Just like you would. Just like anyone would. You showered this morning because you live in a world of hot running water, indoor indoor plumbing, soap on a shelf, and a clean towel on a heated rail. Your medieval counterpart washed their face and hands before every meal, visited the bathhouse before a feast, changed their linen undershirt to lift the oil from their skin, combed herbs through their hair, rubbed salt across their teeth, and kept a wash basin beside their bed as the first and last gesture of every day. They were cleaning themselves. Exactly like you. The tools were different. The need was identical. And the next time you reach for the soap without thinking about it, without gratitude, without awareness, without a single thought about what it cost every generation before yours to get to this moment, you are completing a ritual that stretches back further than the Middle Ages, further than Rome, further than every civilization that ever rose and fell on this earth. You probably showered this morning, and for the first time, you might understand exactly what that means.